The invasion begins. The sky above Colony Delta 9 was not the same anymore. It had turned a deep shade of red, painted by the glow of alien warships descending from the void. The air was thick with the hum of engines, the distant rumble of explosions, and the sharp cries of civilians running for cover. The invasion had begun. The HFY Empire, feared across the galaxy, had arrived in full force. Their towering ships, dark and jagged, blotted out the sun as they hovered over the colony like vultures waiting for a feast. Thousands of alien soldiers marched across the streets, their weapons glowing with deadly energy. They were efficient, merciless, and unstoppable. The colony's defensive turrets fired at the incoming ships, but the enemy's shields absorbed every blast. The human resistance forces tried to fight, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. Within hours, the colony's main security forces had been crushed, and smoke filled the air. In the middle of all this destruction, Captain Elias Kane watched from the shadows. He was hidden inside an underground bunker, gripping his rifle tightly. His face was calm, but his mind was racing. He had known an attack was coming, but not like this. A message crackled through his earpiece. It was from the last surviving officer, Lieutenant Harris. "Kane, they're everywhere. We can't hold them back. The transmission cut off. Silence followed. Kane clenched his jaw. He already knew what had happened. Harris and the last line of human defense were gone. He was alone now. Above, the HFY commander, General Vorik, stood on a raised platform, looking down at the fallen human colony. His red eyes gleamed with amusement as he turned to his second-in-command. "Pathetic," Vorik sneered. "Humans are weak. I expected more of a fight." His officer nodded. "Shall we eliminate the remaining survivors?" Vorik chuckled. "No need. Their spirit is already broken. Let them run and hide. This colony belongs to the HFY now." But Kane wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He was preparing. He moved swiftly through the bunker, checking his weapons and explosives. He wasn't the kind of man to go down without a fight. His unit had been wiped out, but he was still here. And if the HFY thought they had already won, they were dead wrong. The colony's underground tunnels stretched for miles, built as an emergency escape route for humans in times of crisis. Now it would serve a different purpose, a battlefield. Kane placed a hand on the cold metal walls, thinking. He had studied these tunnels for months. He knew every corner, every access point. If he played this right, he could turn them into a death trap for the invaders. He heard heavy footsteps above, HFY soldiers sweeping the ruins, looking for survivors. Kane gripped his rifle and pressed his back against the wall. His heart pounded, but his hands were steady. A small group of HFY soldiers entered the tunnels, their sharp claws clicking against the floor. Their glowing visors scanned the darkness, searching. Kane moved silently, his training taking over. He raised his weapon, waiting. One wrong move, and he'd be dead. One of the aliens snarled. No humans left, just corpses and cowards hiding underground. Kane smiled grimly. Wrong. He pulled the trigger. The first alien dropped instantly, a clean shot through the head. The others barely had time to react before Kane rolled to cover, tossing a grenade toward them. A deafening explosion shook the tunnel, sending bodies flying. The surviving HFY roared in fury. Enemy attack. He's here. Kane's blood surged with adrenaline as he sprinted through the tunnels, reloading his rifle. He had made his move. The HFY would realize soon enough. One human was still standing, and he wasn't going down easy. Above ground, General Vorik received the distress signal from his squad. His amusement faded, replaced with a deep, simmering rage. "What do you mean one human is attacking?" Vorik growled. "Impossible. We destroyed their entire army." The officer hesitated. "Sir, it's not an army. Just one. A lone soldier." Vorik's eyes narrowed. His claws tightened around the metal railing. "Then find him," he hissed. "And bring me his head." Deep in the tunnels, Kane took a deep breath. He had their attention now. Good. The lone defender. The tunnels were dark, damp, and filled with the echoes of distant explosions. Somewhere above, the HFY still believed they had won. They had taken Colony Delta 9, wiped out the human forces, and declared themselves victors. But they had made one mistake. They left one human alive. Captain Elias Kane adjusted his rifle, listening to the sound of boots stomping through the tunnels. The HFY soldiers were hunting him now. They moved in teams, scanning every corridor, their weapons charged and ready. They were cautious, afraid. Kane smirked. Good. The hunt begins. A deep voice echoed through the tunnels. General Vorik himself was speaking through the Sci-Fi communication network. Find this human and eliminate him. No more delays. No more games. The general sounded angry. Kane had gotten under his skin. The soldier crouched in the shadows, watching a group of 5 Sci-Fi soldiers move past. They were massive creatures, taller, stronger, faster than any human. But Kane had something they didn't. Experience. The aliens carried pulse rifles, their glowing barrels lighting up the dark. They weren't used to fighting in confined spaces. Kane, on the other hand, thrived in them. The moment they passed, Kane moved. Silent, precise, deadly. He grabbed the last soldier, snapping his neck before he could scream. The body hit the ground without a sound. The next one turned, too slow. Kane's knife sliced through his throat. The remaining 3 aliens reacted, raising their weapons, but Kane was already gone. He had disappeared into the tunnels like a ghost, a shadow in the darkness. The HFY began to panic. Their voices filled the communication channels. "He's fast," one hissed. "He's using the tunnels against us," another barked. Kane took advantage of the confusion. He pulled out a homemade EMP grenade from his belt and tossed it toward the group. The explosion sent a pulse of energy rippling through the tunnel, shutting down the HFY's weapons and visors. In the sudden darkness, Kane struck like lightning. A single, silenced shot. 1 down. A knife to the ribs. 2 down. By the time the last soldier's visor flickered back to life, he was alone. Then he heard a voice, cold, calm, and right behind him. "Boo!" The alien turned in terror, but Kane's rifle fired point-blank. Another squad, wiped out. But Kane knew this was just the beginning. The HFY's growing fear. General Vorik slammed his fist against the command console aboard the HFY mothership hovering above the planet. "This is unacceptable," he roared. "A single human is slaughtering our forces." His officers remained silent, unwilling to meet his gaze. The great HFY empire had conquered entire star systems, yet now, one human was making them look like fools. Vorik turned to his second-in-command. "Send the hunters." The officer hesitated. "The hunters, sir." Vorik's expression darkened. "You heard me. Deploy the best. This human dies tonight." The hunters arrive. Kane had just finished setting explosives at a key tunnel entrance when he heard it, a deep mechanical growl. His grip on his rifle tightened. The hunters were here. Unlike the normal HFY soldiers, these were specialized warriors, enhanced with cybernetics, faster and deadlier than their brethren. Kane watched as 3 figures stepped into the tunnel, moving with precision. Their armor was sleeker, their weapons more advanced. They carried thermal scanners, making it impossible to hide in the dark. One of them spoke in a low robotic tone. "No more running, human." Kane exhaled slowly. This was going to be fun. A battle in the shadows. The first hunter lunged, moving at a speed Kane had never seen before. He barely dodged, rolling to the side as a plasma blade slashed the air where his head had been. Kane fired his rifle, but the second hunter deflected the shot with a quick energy shield. They were faster, smarter, and more coordinated. But Kane wasn't going to fight them fairly. Instead, he activated the remote charges he had placed earlier. Boom! The tunnel shook as a controlled explosion collapsed part of the ceiling, sending debris crashing down on two of the hunters. The third one remained standing, snarling. Kane didn't give him time to react. He charged forward, using his knife instead of his gun. The alien was caught off guard. Kane slammed the blade into its exposed joint, twisting hard. The creature screamed, its exoskeleton cracking. Kane pulled the blade out and fired a point-blank shot into the alien's face. The last of the hunters collapsed, dead. The message. Kane took a moment to catch his breath. He had won. Again. But he knew this wasn't over. Pulling out the radio transmitter from one of the dead hunters, he activated the signal. "This is Captain Elias Kane to General Vorik." His voice was calm, cold, deadly. There was silence on the other end, then a response. "You dare?" Kane cut him off. "You should have brought more men." Then, with a small smile, he crushed the transmitter beneath his boot. High above, aboard the HFY mothership, General Vorik stared at the broken transmission in stunned silence. For the first time in his life, the great warlord felt something unfamiliar. Fear. The ghost of Delta 9. The wind howled through the broken ruins of Colony Delta 9. Fires burned in the distance, casting eerie shadows against the shattered buildings. The air smelled of smoke, scorched metal, and death. But the HFY weren't celebrating their victory anymore. Something was hunting them. Whispers in the dark. Reports of missing patrols flooded the HFY command center. Squad Theta 9. Report. Silence. Hunter units. Confirm kill on target. Silence. Base Alpha, do you copy? Static. General Vorik's claws tapped against the control panel, his red eyes narrowing. He could feel it now. The shift in the air, the growing fear among his troops. One human, just one. And yet, his warriors whispered about him as if he were a ghost, a shadow in the ruins, a demon in the tunnels, an unstoppable force picking them apart one by one. Vorik growled, "Enough. This ends tonight." He activated the War Council frequency, broadcasting across all remaining HFY forces. "Every soldier, listen well." His voice carried across the battlefield. "We do not fear one man. We do not cower in the dark. We are the HFY, destroyers of civilizations. Find this human. Burn every tunnel. Scan every ruin. No more games. I want his body at my feet by dawn." A chorus of alien roars echoed in response. The hunt had begun. Kane's next move. Captain Elias Kane crouched on the edge of a ruined building, watching the HFY organize their forces. They were getting desperate. He saw squads moving in tight formations now. No more lone patrols wandering into his traps. They had learned, but it didn't matter. Kane had learned too. He had spent years fighting against impossible odds. He had fought on worlds where the ground itself tried to kill him, where the enemy outnumbered him 1,000 to 1. This was nothing new. The HFY thought they were hunting him. They were wrong. He was still hunting them. A message of fear. Kane had an idea. A dangerous one. If he wanted to truly break them, to make them hesitate with every step, he needed to become something more than just a soldier. He needed to become a legend. Moving swiftly, he dragged the corpse of a fallen hunter into an abandoned HFY outpost. He worked quickly, using the alien's blood to paint a message across the walls. Not in words, but in symbols. Symbols of war, symbols of death. Then he activated a distress beacon, one the HFY would definitely detect. The horror unfolds. Half an hour later, a HFY search team arrived. Their weapons were raised, their scanners sweeping the area. The beacon blinked in the center of the outpost, its signal strong. One of them stepped forward, tapping his communicator. "Sir, we found something. Strange." Strange. Vorik's voice growled through the earpiece. The soldier swallowed hard. You need to see this. A moment later, the HFY's command system pinged as a live feed came through. Vorik's eyes widened at what he saw. The walls of the outpost were covered in the blood of his warriors, painted into crude, terrifying symbols. A single human message stood out among the alien markings, scratched into the metal. I am still here. The camera feed cut to static. Then the screaming began. Explosions tore through the outpost as Kane's remote charges detonated, sending fire and shrapnel ripping through the HFY squad. Vorik slammed his fist against the console. No. But it was too late. The damage wasn't just physical. Kane had infected their minds with fear. The night hunt. Kane didn't stop. He moved through the ruins like a ghost, hitting supply lines, sniping high-ranking officers, setting traps in places the HFY thought were safe. Every time they thought they had him cornered, he disappeared. Every time they strengthened their defenses, he found another way in. The HFY began to whisper his name with dread. The ghost of Delta 9. It was no longer just a battle. It was psychological warfare. Vorik's breaking point. Inside the HFY mothership, General Vorik was losing control. His officers avoided his gaze. His soldiers hesitated before following orders. The once mighty invasion force was shrinking by the hour. This wasn't just an attack. This was humiliation. And it all came from one man. Vorik's claws dug into the command table. Enough, he snarled. Bring me the executioners. His officers flinched. The executioners were HFY assassins, their deadliest warriors, trained to erase entire civilizations. Vorik's eyes burned with rage. Find the human. Kill him. Burn everything he touched. I want his remains scattered to the void. A single nod. A silent command. The executioners were on their way. Kane's final warning. From a rooftop overlooking the burning colony, Kane watched the HFY tighten their ranks, double their patrols, and flood the tunnels with fire. He smirked. Good. He activated another stolen HFY communicator, broadcasting a message straight into their command frequency. You're getting scared, General. Silence. Then, Vorik's voice, low, controlled, but filled with barely contained fury. You think you are clever, human. You are alone. No backup. No army. You will fall. Kane chuckled. Funny. That's what your last team said, right before I ended them. Vorik's breathing sharpened. Kane leaned forward, his voice turning cold. You should have brought more men. Then he cut the transmission. As the HFY scrambled to prepare for another attack, Kane checked his gear. His knife was still sharp. His rifle still had ammo. His explosives were ready. The war was far from over, and he was just getting started. The desperate hunt. The HFY Empire was no longer an invading force. They were prey. What started as a swift planetary takeover had turned into a nightmare. Their once unshakable army was now paralyzed by fear. Their elite hunters were dead. Their troops whispered in terror about the ghost of Delta 9, a single human who moved through the ruins like a shadow, striking without warning, disappearing without a trace. And now, General Vorik had made his final move. The executioners arrive. Aboard the HFY mothership, the air was tense. The executioners, the Empire's most feared assassins, had arrived. There were only 3, but each one was worth a battalion. Rezek the Unseen, a master of stealth, rumored to kill before his shadow even touched the ground. Kryn the Butcher, a brute in combat armor, said to have ripped a starship captain apart with his bare claws. Vale the Stalker, a precision killer known for hunting entire rebel cells alone and leaving no survivors. Vorik watched them kneel before him, their glowing red visors reflecting his fury. One human has made us look like fools, he growled. You know your orders. Bring me his head. The executioners nodded silently and vanished into the dropships. The hunt was on. Kane's discovery, Captain Elias Kane had been watching. From the ruins of a collapsed watchtower, he adjusted his stolen Sci-Fi binoculars and observed the alien dropships landing. More troops. No, not just troops. Something worse. Kane had spent years studying the HFY. He knew what this was. The executioners. He exhaled slowly. This was no longer just a hit-and-run fight. This was a death match. And he wouldn't run from it. He checked his ammo, strapped his last dead pack to his belt, and prepared for the battle ahead. All right then. Let's see what you've got. A city turned into a battlefield. The executioners spread out across the ruined colony. Each one moved with deadly precision, scanning for any trace of Kane. Razek melted into the darkness, his cloaking device rendering him nearly invisible. Kryn smashed through buildings, tearing walls apart, forcing Kane into the open. Vale took position on a rooftop, his sniper rifle scanning for any movement. They weren't hunting a man. They were exterminating a problem. But Kane wasn't hiding anymore. He was waiting. First blood. Razek moved silently through the ruins, his active camo keeping him hidden. He detected heat signatures, small, distant, faint. Too faint. By the time he realized the bodies were decoys, lifeless dummies wrapped in heated blankets, it was too late. A whisper broke through his helmet radio. Gotcha. Then, boom. A remote mine exploded beneath his feet, sending Razek flying through the air. His cloak flickered and died, exposing his form. He groaned, trying to recover. Crikey. A bullet pierced his skull, ending him instantly. One down. Kane moved before the others could react. The Titan falls. Kryn heard the explosion and roared in fury. He charged toward the scene. Massive armored footsteps shaking the ground. "Human," he bellowed. Kane didn't respond. He was too busy setting his next trap. As Kryn rounded a corner, Kane fired, right into a support beam. The entire building collapsed, burying Kryn under tons of rubble. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a hand burst through the debris. Kryn wasn't dead. The brute heaved himself out, his armor cracked but his rage burning hotter than ever. "You think rocks will stop me?" he snarled. Kane sighed. "Nope, but this might." He tossed a dead pack onto Kryn's chest. The alien barely had time to look down before Kane pressed the detonator. Boom. Kryn's massive frame was torn apart, his body collapsing in a smoking heap. 2 down. 1 to go. The stalker's last shot. Vale had been watching, waiting, calculating. He had ignored his fallen comrades. They were distractions. Kane was now in the open, exposed, vulnerable. Val's sniper rifle locked onto him. A perfect shot. He exhaled, preparing to end this once and for all. Bang. The shot fired true, hitting a human silhouette dead center. Only, it wasn't Kane. Val's visor flickered, his target glitched. A hologram. His eyes widened. No. A knife sank into his throat. Kane had been behind him the whole time. He twisted the blade, whispering, "I don't miss, either." Vale gurgled once, then went limp. 3 down. The executioners were dead. Vork's breaking point. Aboard the Sci-Fi mothership, General Vorik watched his greatest warriors fall one by one. Silence filled the bridge. No one spoke. Then, Kane's voice came through the comms. Mocking. Relentless. Victorious. "That was your best." Disappointing. Vorik's claws dug into the armrest of his throne. "You think this is over, human?" he growled. "I still have an entire fleet. And I still have your command codes." Kane interrupted. Vorik froze. "Yeah," Kane continued, grinning as he hacked into their systems. "You should really secure your officers' datapads better. Let's see what happens when I turn off your shields." Alarms blared throughout the Sci-Fi warships. Red lights flashed. shields dropping, defense systems failing. Panic erupted among the fleet. Kane spoke one last time. "You lost, Vorik. And you know what? You never even had a chance." With that, he pressed the final command. The end of an empire. The colony's orbital cannons, long thought destroyed, activated, thanks to Kane's override. They opened fire. One by one, the HFY warships exploded, their unshielded hulls ripped apart by heavy artillery. The once mighty invading fleet collapsed in flames. Kane stood atop the ruins, watching as the sky burned. A voice crackled through the comms. Vorik's last words, filled with rage and disbelief. One human, just one, did all of this. Kane smirked. Next time, bring an army. Then the mothership exploded, ending the war for good. The turning point. The war was over. The HFY had been defeated. Their mothership reduced to burning wreckage, their fleet torn apart, and their warriors either dead or fleeing into deep space. But Captain Elias Kane wasn't celebrating. Not yet. Because he knew one thing about war. It's never truly over. The aftermath of war. The once thriving colony Delta 9 was now a graveyard. Charred buildings, shattered roads, and the eerie silence of an abandoned battlefield. Kane stood on the ruins of what was once the command center, looking over the wreckage. The sky still burned from the falling debris of the HFY ships, their remains crashing into the barren landscape beyond the city. He had won, but he had also lost. Every soldier he fought beside, gone. Every friend, every innocent life, wiped out before the fight even truly began. He clenched his jaw. Revenge wasn't victory. It never was. And yet he wasn't done. Not yet. Because there was still one loose end. The final survivor. A distress beacon pinged in his visor. A weak signal, barely active. Kane narrowed his eyes. Not human. His grip on his rifle tightened. If HFY had survived, he wasn't about to let them crawl away to fight another day. Following the signal, he moved through the rubble, boots crunching over shattered glass and scorched metal. Then he found it. A damaged HFY drop pod, its hull blackened from the orbital bombardment. Inside, trapped beneath a pile of debris, a single alien figure barely clinging to life. Not a soldier, not a warrior, a scientist. Kane raised his rifle. You picked the wrong side. The HFY weakly turned its head, blood seeping from its wounds. No, you don't understand. Kane stepped closer, his instincts screaming at him to pull the trigger and end it. But something was off. The scientist wasn't afraid. It was desperate. They're coming, it rasped. You don't have much time. Kane's finger hovered over the trigger. Who's coming? The HFY coughed, trying to push itself up. You think you won. You only started something far worse. The words chilled him in a way no battlefield ever had. Vorik was just a warlord, the alien whispered. But the true empire, the ones who rule from the shadows, they will come. And they will not send an army. Kane frowned. Then what will they send? The scientist shuddered. A god. A new threat rises. The transmission reached deep space. A signal, small, fractured, but unmistakable. A warning. Far beyond human space, in a sector known only as the Abyss, a fleet older than time itself stirred from its slumber. A cold, metallic voice whispered through the void. Prepare the Harbinger. In the darkness, something woke up, and it was coming. For Kane. For Earth. For everything. The final stand. The ruins of Colony Delta 9 lay in eerie silence, but Captain Elias Kane could feel it. The shift in the air, the unsettling stillness before a storm. The war with the HFY was over, but something worse was coming. And the dying alien scientist had just given him the name of his next nightmare. A god is coming. Kane had fought monsters before. He had taken on an entire empire alone and won. But this was something different. He wasn't fighting just another warlord. He was about to fight something that should not exist. And he was running out of time. The sky cracks open. A deep, unnatural hum filled the air. Kane looked up. The stars shifted. Something massive tore through reality itself, appearing from the void above Delta 9. A structure. No, a vessel, darker than the deepest shadows, its jagged surface pulsing with an eerie glow. It wasn't a ship. It was something ancient, something that had watched civilizations rise and fall before humanity had even left Earth. And it had arrived. The scientist's last words echoed in Kane's mind. "You don't have much time. The Harbinger has arrived." Deep inside the colossal vessel, something stirred. Cold metal shifted. Wires, like veins, pulsed with an energy that was not technology, but something older, something far worse. And at its heart, a figure stood. Not quite alive, not quite machine, but something in between. A voice, layered and hollow, whispered across the ruins. "Human." Kane's heart hammered in his chest. "You have disturbed the balance." The voice wasn't coming from the ship. It was inside his mind. A shadow descended from the massive structure above, landing softly in the ruins before him. Kane instinctively raised his rifle. Then he saw it, and for the first time in a long, long time, he felt fear. The face of a god. The figure was tall, impossibly tall, cloaked in shifting metal that moved like liquid shadows, its form flickering between solid and ethereal. Its face wasn't a face at all. A smooth black void with only two piercing white lights where eyes should be. And Kane knew, without a doubt, this wasn't something you could kill. Not with a bullet. Not with an army. This wasn't a war. This was judgment. The entity, the Harbinger, tilted its head. "You are an anomaly." Kane gritted his teeth. "Yeah, I get that a lot." The test. Without warning, the world shifted. The ruins faded into darkness, and suddenly, Kane was somewhere else. A battlefield, not his own. He saw planets burning, entire civilizations collapsing under a force he couldn't understand. A vision of the past, or the future. And then he saw himself, standing alone, holding the line, just like always. Then the Harbinger's voice whispered, "What makes you different?" Kane's breathing slowed. He didn't know if this was a test or an execution. But he knew one thing. He wasn't going down without a fight. The last bullet. The vision shattered, and Kane was back in the ruins. The Harbinger hadn't moved. It was waiting. Kane felt it now, the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about him. It was about humanity itself. He had one shot. Not with his gun. With his words. He lowered his rifle. "You think I'm an anomaly," Kane said, stepping forward. "You're right." The Harbinger watched. "Because humans don't break. You destroy planets. We rebuild. You wipe out our armies. We fight harder. You take everything from us." Kane's eyes burned. "We take it back." Silence. Then, the impossible happened. The Harbinger laughed. Not a sound, not a voice, but something deeper, like the universe itself exhaling. "Very well, human." The entity began to fade, dissolving into the void. "We will watch, and when the time comes, you will stand before us again." The sky tore open once more. And just like that, the Harbinger was gone. A new war begins. Kane stood alone in the silence. He didn't know why the Harbinger had spared him, but he knew what it meant. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. He looked up at the sky. Somewhere out there, something far worse than the XL-FAR was waiting. Watching. Planning. Kane cracked his knuckles. "All right then, let's see what you've got." The legend lives on. The battlefield was silent. The XL-FAR were dead. Their empire, shattered. And a harbinger, a being older than history itself, had spared Captain Elias Kane. Not out of mercy, out of interest. Kane had become something more than a soldier, more than a survivor. He had become an anomaly, and that made him dangerous. A universe watching. The ruins of Colony Delta 9 still burned, but the war was over. Or at least, this war. Across the galaxy, messages spread like wildfire. A single human destroyed an empire. A lone soldier fought an entire army, and won. The ghost of Delta 9 is real. The story twisted, changed, grew into a legend. And legends have power. A meeting in the dark. Far beyond human space, in a station hidden between the stars, the galaxy's most dangerous beings gathered. The Black Council. They ruled from the shadows. Powerful warlords, rogue AI, exiled kings, and forgotten gods. They had never feared humanity before. But now, they spoke his name. Elias Kane. One man, one soldier. He killed an empire. He defied a god. They could not ignore him. And so, the council made a decision. Kane had to die. Not just for what he had done, but for what he might become. A new mission. Kane sat alone in the ruins, staring at the sky. The stars had never looked closer. His comms crackled. A familiar voice came through. Admiral Kale, one of the last high-ranking officers left in the Terran Defense Force. Kane, if you're hearing this, we need you. Badly. Kane sighed. Figured as much. You pissed off the wrong people. Kane smirked. Good. Kale hesitated. It's bigger than that. We intercepted a signal, encrypted, high-level council code. There's a bounty on you now. Kane leaned forward. How big? Enough to make the dead crawl out of their graves for a shot at you. Kane exhaled, shaking his head. Great. I always wanted to be popular. Listen, we need to get you off Delta 9 now. I'm sending a team. No. Silence. Kane. They won't stop, Kale. He stood, looking at the wreckage of what was once a home for thousands. This won't end until I end it first. So what are you going to do? Kane picked up his rifle, checked his ammo, pulled his knife from its sheath. Then he smirked. I'm going hunting. The ghost of Delta 9 rises. The bounty went out within hours. Across the galaxy, criminals, mercenaries, and assassins all heard the call. Target: Elias Kane. Last seen: Delta 9. Dead or alive. Every hunter, every killer, every warlord in the galaxy wanted his head. But Kane, he was already one step ahead. Somewhere in the void, aboard a stolen Selfar warship, a single distress signal was sent. Not to the Terran fleet, not to the Black Council, but to something far, far worse. A message in an ancient forgotten code, one only the Harbinger would understand. A challenge, a declaration. You wanted me alive. Come and find me. And somewhere, in the darkest part of the universe, the Harbinger smiled.